Hi guys, my name is Adam, and today I want to talk about Zen. So this is a project we've been working on for a while, and what are we doing? So what this basically is a peer-to-peer financial system, and we integrate Bitcoin. So Bitcoin can run on our system. Bitcoin can run on our system with these. So what's the problem we're really addressing here? The problem is that you don't really control your own financial assets. For example, the other day, I had this opinion about stock movement, and I call up my broker and I tell him that I want to buy a call option. And he sends me back 3 forms: one stating my net worth, the second giving me a test to see how educated I am as being a financial investor, and the third is basically a form giving him permission to take $200 to check this. And then he told me in 2 weeks he's going to get back to me, and he'll get back to me and say if I am allowed or am not allowed to buy the option. So I wasn't very happy with that, and this is the problem because today we always rely on third parties to own financial assets and to facilitate trust. If I want to enter a deal with someone else who is not trusted, I have to use a third party as an escrow agent. So there's obviously regulatory hurdles. The ability to participate in the system is limited. The kind of assets you have are limited. You can't buy every derivative. American citizens, for example, can't invest in overseas companies. And these brokerage firms engage in rent-seeking behaviors frequently. So what's our solution to this issue? Our solution is to create a peer-to-peer financial system. So when we look at the financial system, what is it really? You could synthesize all of the financial agreements we have as basically being direct ownership of digital assets which represent promises that are enforceable. So if you think about a call, it's basically you pay me money today and I promise to pay you funds in the future. You think about a stock, you give me money today, I promise to pay you dividends in the future. If you think about an ETF, it's the compromisation of a bunch of promises which I promise to deliver onto someone else, right? I have a bunch of promises of all these stocks, put them together, and then this ETF promises to pay all those dividends out to me. So using promises and assets, we can basically replicate the financial system. In our paradigm, we view assets as tokens, promises as contracts, and enforcement over the protocol. So basically, if I want to issue a stock now, if I want to issue an option, any kind of financial derivative, I have a contract that gives a token, and the terms of this contract are written in code that's run on the peer network. So, for example, how would this work? I'm writing a call. I write some code or copy and paste some code, and I define the asset I'm looking at, let's say Apple stock, the terms, and I insert collateral. You could use any collateral. It could be underlying. It could be like the Apple stock itself. It could be Bitcoins. It could be Zen. It's irrelevant. I insert the collateral into the contract, and the contract holds that collateral. And then let's say someone else wants to buy that from me. Let's say Bob comes and he wants to buy my call on Apple. So what he's going to do is he's going to send money to the contract, and then that contract is going to issue one Apple call token to him. After that, Bob is free to transfer that token to Charlie or Dave, and the contract doesn't have to be aware of the whole mechanism of Bob sending the money around or which other contracts hold it. The contract doesn't care. Now, at the end of the day, if I don't settle in an honest manner with Dave, then Dave can always activate the contract, send the token to it, and exercise his call option. And then the contract just runs in the system. It sees, okay, Dave sent me a token. I'm going to calculate his profit, and I'm going to send him out the profit. So how, on a more in-depth level, how does this work? The best way for us to look at it is using Bitcoin as a framework. Bitcoin is something I think we're relatively familiar with, we all know and feel comfortable with. So in Bitcoin, we have one primary asset, BTC, Bitcoins, and those Bitcoins can be locked, held by basically public keys, and they can be held by scripts. And when they're going to be unlocked and to be transferred, basically both of these mechanisms unlock the coins, put in a transaction, the miner verifies that the unlock it and relock is legal, validates it, and inserts the valid transaction into a block. So that's a overly brief summary of the Bitcoin paradigm. In Zen, we do things very similarly. Rather than having only Bitcoins as an asset, we have tokens as an asset. So they all stand on equal ground. Unlike other systems that you may be familiar with, like Ethereum, where Ethereum tokens are better than the rest of the tokens, all of our tokens stand on the same ground. And with us, public keys also have can hold funds. Our differences is basically tokens, contracts, and the active contract set. So when a user wants to send a transaction, he just does it the same way he does in Bitcoin. However, when a contract, let's say a contract holds funds, for example, what I was talking about earlier with, you know, I put collateral in a contract. So that contract now needs to run somewhere. So the contracts sit offline, theoretically. And when the contract wants to send a transaction, first it's activated. It goes online. When it goes online, or becomes part of the active contract set, means that all the miners are aware of the contract. It becomes part of consensus. Previously, it wasn't part of consensus. And once all the miners agree on what the contract's code is, then that contract can send a transaction. And again, those transactions are simply validated by miners and included into blocks. So a bit more in depth, what can tokens do? They represent claims, and they're easily transferable. So when I transfer a token, the whole system doesn't need to be aware that I'm transferring a token from A to B. And how do tokens come to being? So with the exception of Zen, all tokens are created by a contract. Each contract has its specific hash, and each token has a hash that each token is correlated directly to the contract that created it. Yeah, that's basically about tokens. Yeah, go for it. No, go for it.
So you have token, and then you have the collateral that there is some incentive that actually make it work. Then you have the collateral,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is some cash, some data band that it's the incentive that make it work.
Right. Oh, fair enough. So you have the contract. The contract itself, I create the contract, and then I put collateral in the contract. I put the collateral in the contract, and then that contract could create a token, and the token represents who's entitled to the upside of the contract. And in the case that the person who should be paying the upside doesn't pay the upside, then the person who has a token can go to the contract and say, hey, I have the token, you know, give me the collateral. So, right, so if I write the contract, maybe each person would have his different requirements based on, you know, your evaluation of my risk profile, how much you trust me, how much you don't. But you could, let's say, demand, okay, Adam, I want you to have 120% collateral, or I want you to have 200% collateral. The user who's your counterparty, the two counterparties, basically, they need to reach an agreement and say how much collateral they want to put in. Right. So the collateral, that's a very good point. And we're actually going to touch on that later, but I'll say this. the collateral is not only Bitcoin. I hope that Bitcoin is the main asset used there, but the collateral could equally be dollar token created by the dollar contract of UBS Bank, and the validity of that depends on if you trust the bank or not. Regarding how things fluctuate with Bitcoin price, that's an issue, and you'd want to have like a margin call, right? If the Bitcoin price is going down too much, in that situation, you'd say, hey, either you put more Bitcoin or BitZen in it, update the collateral. Well, that wouldn't necessarily need to be in consensus, but yeah, we would have software that a user would know which contracts he's in, what obligations he's made, what his margin calls would be, and it would say, hey, you owe money or you're going to get cut out.
But Adam, the concept of the margin call makes sense if we're talking about an option or something like that, but for an arbitrary contract, it's not obvious that there is a meaningful sense of a margin call, right? If the contract said that in 10 years, depending on who won the elections, you get this or that, so you can't do a margin call beyond that.
No, you're absolutely correct. I was referring to Guy's specific example about what happens if you're using Bitcoin as a collateral and the Bitcoin price goes down.
But that's just one possible issue. I mean, in general, it could be the case that the collateral turns out to be not enough for whatever the obligation is. If the obligation of the contract, if the promise is flexible enough, then it can go arbitrarily and it can be more than a collateral, and you might not know it in advance in a way that allows you to make a margin call. So how would you handle it?
Right. So let's say I have let's say I have a okay. So my null hypothesis would be that a user would not agree to send money to a contract if he didn't think the collateral was satisfactory. Before users would start a deal, they would require more collateral. If you're saying, let's say there's would you give an example exactly so I can address exactly your concern?
Well, I don't have an example in mind, but I could try to come up with an example. But let's say the contract is some sort of, well, actually no, I don't really have. Actually, even with the idea, no, I don't have an example in mind right now. But in general, even if the purchase of the token insists that the collateral is enough for whatever circumstance would happen, then you have the problem that the issue of the contract needs a lot of liquidity, needs all this wealth to put up front in order for the contract to work.
There's two things I would say. So if you want to write a full call, right? So you'd want the guy to have the underlying asset. If you're afraid of what if it goes to the moon tomorrow, and what is he going to do? So do you want him to hold the underlying? On the other hand, if you could, I see your point, and usually I would say that users would view these things as like call spreads. So I have whatever, $100 upside, and I understand the collateral is going to hold that $100, and that's fine. And you could construct a call out of a bunch of call spreads with different risk profiles, I guess, different strikes. That's how I envision it happening. So we have the contracts. Those are the peer-to-peer commitments. So I basically write the terms. You see the terms. The terms don't have to be seen by everyone. They only are seen by everyone when the contract moves into the active set. So they could be kept offline. Hypothetically, we could do a hash of it. And you know that the terms hash to that same number. And so it's a scalability issue. So how do contracts work? Oh, one important point. Unlike other paradigms where you view contracts as a part of a big virtual machine, with us, each contract can be viewed as its own self-contained computer. So you have a bunch of, you can think of Zen as like an internet among which these small computers communicate. So they're all sandboxed and isolated from each other. And when they want to communicate with each other, they just pass excuse me. They just pass messages to each other via transactions. So if contract A wants to talk to contract B, it needs to be in the active contract set, create a transaction. In that transaction, it attaches metadata, and that metadata says, OK, B, you should be doing this. And all our contracts are written in a Z-star. This is a language that's built off a lot of work Microsoft has done. And what Z-stars allows us to do is, unlike previous systems where you have a gas system where basically, okay, I want to be able to write anything in a contract. And I don't want to be limited like Bitcoin script is where I can't have loops and I can't have all these other things. So how do I know how many computational resources this contract is going to take? So what Ethereum does is they have a deposit, you put up a deposit, and then for each step, it takes off a fee. We do something different where ahead of time, you can prove to someone the amount of computational resources the contract is going to take. So when I write the contract, I can say, this is the maximum it will take, and here you go. Here's the money for this level of computation. And also, another benefit of this language is it allows formal verification, which is basically something that says, OK, you know how the contract is going to perform ahead of time. OK, so the active contract set. The active contract set could be viewed as like the consensus environment. So the contracts that are in the set are the contracts that are like online. And everything else, all the contracts that are in the set could be viewed as the contracts that are offline. So going through the process of how the active contract set works is the following. Let's say I have a token that represents a call, and I'm entitled to a lot of money, but this guy isn't paying me. So I want to basically extract my money from the contract. So I would submit the contract's code. I would prove the bounds on that contract, and I'd pay the miner fee, and the contract would be activated. So what that basically means is how much computational, how many resources would this contract exert on miners? How much work would miners have to do to process this contract? Wait. So the collateral held in the contract is separate from the fees that are paid to run the contract. The miners don't get to keep the collateral, they get to keep the fees. So they don't really care about what the collateral is. The user cares about what the collateral is, the miners care about what they get paid their fees in. So I don't mean to be short. Is that clear? Could they get paid in Bitcoin? What do you think, Nathan? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So how does the active contract set work? We began to discuss. So the user submits code, right? Resource bound, pay the miner fee. Then the contracts become active. And now all the Zen miners are basically storing the contracts code. They're all aware of it. They're all running it. But only for the period of time in which it's active. So when the user attached a fee, he also specified how many blocks the contract will remain active for. After the money, yes. The resource bounds are for the contract. The resource. Yes.
And that will be the fee, and this other one will be the fee for every future transaction? Or?
Yes. If I'm understanding you correctly, I'd say yes.
Not just the upper one for the fee, but the exact fee.
No. So, right. So, no, you don't pay for the transactions at that point. All you do is you pay to bring the contract online.
Yeah, but okay, after that there will be transactions. Okay.
Right. We don't know if there's going to be transactions, if there's not. You could have different contracts that have different purposes. They could be doing different things. So you're not going to pay upfront for all the fees that contract may ever create. Right? The contract would have to pay the fee for its transaction when it decides to make that transaction.
Does the contract need sort of collateral paid fees that it will?
Yes. Well, you could view it that way. I would say the contract needs to put a down payment to be activated, and then it holds money to persist in the active contract set.
So it has a self-contained fund to pay fees.
Right. I'm sorry if I didn't mention that. Yes, contracts can hold money. They can transfer money just like users.
So the non-paying contract to go online?
Mm-hmm.
essentially funding it for executing in the future?
Yeah, 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 yes. I would probably activate a contract if I wanted to execute. Usually.
Would I have to?
Hmm?
What if I cancel it? Do I receive it back?
Well, usually what I would do is rather than, you could get money back from canceling it, but usually I would just not want it to run as long. Usually I just want the contract to run, a couple blocks and pay me my money, and that's it.
Proving the resource bounds is proving that the contract contains enough funds for the maximum amount of resources that it might consume.
Not exactly. Again, I think we two guys at the end. It's about how contracts relate to Bitcoin, how Zen and Bitcoin are similar, and that's like this stuff is about consensus bounds, consensus limits, and it's a big topic.
So would I need to prove that the amount I put in would be enough? Or can I just put in and have it stop in the middle?
No, it can never stop in the middle. If it operates, then it runs to the end.
Okay, so I
Unlike
don't have to
Ethereum.
prove.
Yeah.
So there's no chance of putting not enough funds and getting.
Not for it to be activated for when you activate it. When you activate it, it's going to be activated. But then how long is it active for? It could be active for 10 blocks, could be active for 1,000 blocks. I don't know why.
So it's only active as long as they have enough funds for another block.
Yes. Thank you. So right, the contract becomes active. It sits in the set. Every miner that mines in the next block that the contract's in, the contract pays a fee to that miner. And when it runs out, the miners forget about it. It's no longer part of consensus. And that's basically it. It exits the system as far as miners are concerned.
And the collector always released one of the sides?
No, only if while the active contract was in the set, if it sent a transaction releasing the collateral. It could have, and if not, it falls back off. Let's say, for example, I mistakenly activated a contract, but actually I wasn't entitled to any money from it. So okay, the contract would run. It would say, oh, you know what? You activated me for no reason. You're not entitled to any money. It would go back to sleep. Then I would activate it again when I actually am entitled to money. Mere activation of it doesn't mean it releases its collateral. So to recap, tokens can be owned by users or contracts. Each contract is its own self-contained computer. And active contracts send messages via transactions. So all the contracts are interacting via the Zen protocol. So maybe it would come to mind to compare this to what's the difference between this and the conventional financial system? Well, with us, individuals can transact without any third party. Maybe people compare this to Bitcoin. So what's the difference between us? So we view, in our opinion, Bitcoin as decentralized money, and we're a decentralized financial system. What's the difference between us and other token systems, which we really have a lot of respect for? So the token systems are claims on decentralized property, but Zen is beyond just having a claim on the decentralized a decentralized claim on property. You can enforce the cash flows that should come out of that property in a decentralized manner. What's the difference between us and a virtual machine? Well, like I've previously went on about, is our contracts interact by sending messages, not by transferring its flow of control to a different machine.
So why is it a good symbol? Why is the last thing a good symbol?
Right. So I think it comes down to what you're viewing the system for. If the system is to run maybe, I don't know, decentralized, it's good because it results in increased security, increased scalability, but it may have some compromises regarding immediate interaction of things. My opinion, that's not what we're designed for. I don't also think that's what a blockchain is necessarily optimal for. So the next thing we have here, which is one of our big things is our integration with Bitcoin. So our nodes, they mine the Zen blockchain, but they observe what's going on in the Bitcoin blockchain. And what this means is you can do things in Zen based on what's going on in Bitcoin. So for example, regarding the distribution mechanism, maybe I could say that, you know, for every Bitcoin day destroyed you hold, for every day you've been holding Bitcoins, you can issue yourself X amount of Zen. Another thing I can do is you can take, smart contracts can take the Bitcoin state as an argument. So I can say, if these Bitcoins move, then I surrender this collateral. So one of the obvious use cases is, so why don't we use this like a side chain? So that's what we're going to illustrate here. So how we would go about this. I would have Bitcoins that are in my wallet that I have, I know they're not going anywhere. Step one. Step two is I would create a smart contract in Zen that says, look at these Bitcoins. If they move, surrender the collateral. Then I take collateral that's already on the Zen chain. They could be Zen, they could be something else. And I send them into the smart contract. Then the smart contract will issue me a Bitcoin token, a BitZen, right? And then I'm free to use that BitZen token anywhere else in any mechanism, and it can do whatever any other token can do in Zen. People trust that this token is worth a Zen, this token is worth a Bitcoin because of the collateral. As time moves on, maybe we can have these things not fully collateralized. You can start using, maybe trusting some people a bit more. But initially, you can just put collateral down with a certain margin, issue BitZen, and move it on to the network. Another thing we can do, so this is using Bitcoins on Zen. Another thing we can do is we can use Zen to secure Bitcoin transactions.
No, but wait, so you get some intuition on how do you move a Bitcoin in the Zen?
OK, sure. Fair enough. So the BitZen, the Bitcoin representation on the Zen network, that moves just like any other Zen token works. The way.
But it says, I don't know, for some hash of a transaction, for some output.
Mm-hmm.
It sends for some output of a Bitcoin transaction, right? And it corresponds to some.
No. It doesn't. What happens on Zen isn't affecting the Bitcoin network.
Okay.
Right? It's just like rather than trying to freeze the Bitcoin somehow, we're saying, I'm not going to move those Bitcoins. I'm good for it, because if I'm not, then you're going to be able to liquidate my collateral.
My Zen token.
If I issued the BitZen, I put collateral down to issue that, or else the collateral could be.
One Bitcoin for one Bitcoin.
Yeah, for example.
Put a collateral of a Bitcoin?
You could create, so you could have BitZen issued by one party and then BitZen issued by another party, right? This may get a bit complex, but you could, so I could use the BitZen issued by A as collateral for B, right? You could create like, you could create like pools of this, and you could even tranche the risk of default.
But the end of the day, but the collateral is in Zen, right?
No, it could be dollars. So for all we're concerned, it could be dollars.
All the BitZen tokens are equal?
No, they're not. Each BitZen each BitZen is originated by its own contract. We expect that they'll be viewed. They can be mixed in such a way that they'll be viewed as equal maybe by the market. But if someone says I have a BitZen, like BitZen is just a term I'm using, right? There's no like special status BitZen. It's like this contract generated something and it's claiming that it is worth a Bitcoin. Then you're going to come in, you're going to evaluate it. You're going to say, OK, is this thing really worth a Bitcoin? Or under what terms is this worth a Bitcoin?
You said I can move those tokens into other contracts and move them around, so they have some kind of value that is agreed upon the network.
It's agreed among the people using the network, but not among the network itself. As far as the network's concerned, those are just tokens.
So how do you put dollar collateral?
Yeah.
If someone issues Zen dollar, and they can.
No, so you could have, let's say, a UBS bank, right, so coming around saying, OK, I'm issuing I'm issuing Zen dollars, right, and I'm good for it. Trust me, trust me. Then I actually foolishly buy Zen dollars from them with my real Bitcoins. Then I could use those Zen dollars to collateralize a BitZen.
So basically every Zen contract is a
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, well, like I said, they're all segregated. So yeah, you could view each of them as its own separate thing, its own separate sidechain, I guess, but not. We're not aiming for that. We don't want to go in that direction. I keep it simple. But yes, you could try to emulate a blockchain in a contract and have it do what you're proposing, I think.
Would there be a way to sell the BitZen and receive a real Bitcoin?
Yeah, yeah. So so let's say I put down 200% collateral, and then I issued a BitZen to you. Now the contract says that the token holder can specify where he wants the Bitcoins to go. So he can say, okay, I'm going to say I want the Bitcoins to go to this Bitcoin address. You're going to send me back the BitZen. Yeah, you're going to send me back the BitZen and say, send the money here. And then I need to send the Bitcoins to the address you specified. And, huh?
Manually?
So the person who buys, the person who's sending Bitcoin, he just sends Bitcoin
You have to send it manually.
Yeah.
Has to sign a Bitcoin transaction.
The contract can't sign the Bitcoin transaction.
No. Zen doesn't, yeah, Zen has no way of going into Bitcoin. Yeah, did that answer? Okay.
But then Zen can observe if the person sent the Bitcoin.
Exactly. And if he fails to,
Take the collateral.
take the collateral. Exactly. That's the point.
Is there a reason why design did that?
Is there a reason?
The contract can't initiate transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Well, I guess how would it go about that?
Like the person.
Yeah, you'd have to be you'd have to be delivering the contract your private keys, which in this case probably would become public. Public information. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I understand your question, but I don't. People have tried it. We're going to touch on people have tried to do this. They're talking about things like sidechains and Blockstream, and it's difficult. So the next thing we can do. The next thing we can do is we could secure a Bitcoin transaction with a smart contract. So let's say, if you guys are familiar with Satoshi Dice, let's say I want to do a Satoshi Dice style gambling site, but binary options. So you're going to send me a Bitcoin, and then if X happens, I'm going to owe you money. So I'm going to create a smart contract, so you trust me, because right now you don't trust me. I'm going to create a smart contract that looks at an address, and it says, okay, if this address B received Bitcoins from A, and A is entitled to Bitcoins based on the conditions. For example, in this example, that the asset price is greater than the strike price, and B failed to pay the Bitcoins to A that he's entitled to, then the collateral is forfeited. So this is a simple example, but potentially in the future you could make Bitcoins more secure. Another way to view this, let's say maybe an exchange could do this. You could say, okay, I send this money to an exchange. Yeah, you could create Bitcoin and maybe give it a bit more security. So people may compare this to Blockstream's implementation of sidechains, a PEG sidechain. How is this different? So our PEG doesn't rely on submitting proof of work to the main chain. That's exactly the point you touched on, I think. So to be able to spend a Bitcoin if a Bitcoin was sent to an address where it's supposed to sit and wait until it receives further instructions from the collateral contractor, whoever has a BitZen token, it's still spendable. There's nothing stopping me from cheating. It's just that it doesn't serve my best interest to cheat. How are we different maybe from a federated sidechain? So with us, there's no federation. There's no central party that determines who's trustworthy or who's not. It all works on a free market basis, and they can all compete to provide liquidity here. That's it. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
Trying to summarize, see if I'm understanding. You kind of created the peer-to-peer networks. So I'm thinking Oracle, you put Oracle, you peer-to-peer way.
Yeah.
That's the essence.
Well, I think that the protocol itself is also a new way of doing smart contracts. Like, no one's done something like this before. But besides the protocol, yeah, all of our nodes are aware of Bitcoin, and you could view it as a peer-to-peer oracle. About Bitcoin, though.
How did I show that I actually executed the
How do you show that you? So right. So first, the contracts. So you want to activate the contract. You want to activate the contract.
I was thinking more as a miner.
As. Right. So okay. So good point. So I guess the essence is that the miners maybe don't care as much about the computational process of the execution as much as they care about, after going through that process, is a transaction that is created by that execution, is that transaction valid? So let's say miner A includes in a block a transaction that was created by a contract. He says, this contract wants to spend this money. So the other miners don't have to verify how he got to that conclusion. They just have to verify the conclusion itself is valid.
How about censorship regarding the outcome of that contract? Let's say the underlying collateral is very large and I don't want to execute that contract.
So how would you go about censoring that?
As a miner, I would not process that transaction.
Yeah, what? Yeah, if you want to. Yeah.
If you introduce yourself? Yes, I am Nathan Cook. Pleased to meet you. Yeah, so about collateral and very large transactions and miner censorship. A miner is generally going to have the same sort of incentives as in Bitcoin. If you send a very large Bitcoin transaction, very large, then you could say that theoretically a miner has an incentive to reverse it, to do a double spend, or as been discussed. What seems to prevent it in Bitcoin is miner competition. So a miner does not know that miner himself is going to be the next guy to mine a block. So it's in Bitcoin still, it's in his interest to include transactions, even large transactions, because if not, then he could end up on a minority chain, on an orphan chain. Now in Zen, it's very similar. The issue comes when you're dealing with tokens that relate to things like off the network. So if you're dealing with Bitcoin tokens or something like that, tokens exchangeable for Bitcoin, then theoretically the Bitcoin tokens, the large values that aren't connected to the Zen token. But the incentives are exactly the same, because miners get paid in transaction fees and so on. If they end up on a minority chain, then they lose all the transaction fees that they accrue on that chain.
In addition, you pay rent for, right? You pay for the block.
That's right. Yeah. This is the question that we said we'd leave to the end. We're talking about activating contracts.
Just to continue on that, if I can.
Yep.
Okay. But you could maybe use it as a hedge. I mean, you can on the one side put the call contract, and on the other side say, okay, if this contract will be activated, then maybe I would want to try and censor it. So I could hold, like, I don't know, take my risk down, because, like 20% I could censor it and then try to mitigate it.
Generally, censoring contract creation, that's a 50% contract activation. Sorry, censoring that is a 50% attack, because otherwise someone will include the transaction creating the contract, activating the contract into a block. And unless the attacker has more than 50%, they're not going to succeed in censoring that block, and therefore not going to succeed in censoring that transaction. So yes, that's the basic idea there. And in terms of hedging and so on, or having a doubly secure approach, things like that, you can use something. If you send transactions to a contract that isn't active yet, so you lock it to that contract, then you don't have to just lock it to that contract. You could use a multi-sig. You say either pay to that contract, or it's recoverable with my own private key, my own pub key signature.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a variety of mechanisms you can use for that. Yes?
Two questions. From a contract, you can create a token, which later on you can use in another project. It's a multi-layer. I'm thinking about token explorer that you need to build because you create very complex assets like CDS, and you won't be able to know at a certain point what's the real value of the token.
Okay.
And there's a lot of conditions.
Well, there's two stages. Firstly, a contract creates a token. And then afterwards, that token can be used in other contracts or other users. But each contract can only create one sort of token. So, in fact, for any particular hash, you can say, okay, this is how many tokens are outstanding. These are, and this is the contract that creates it. Have the same hash. So the higher level analytics that you want would say, okay, what is this contract? What does it do? Is this contract a call or not? So, and that would be run off chain, not on chain. There would be verification as part of a block block analytics, and there would be consensus or some agreement on people to use trustworthy analytics or to simply to trust that a contract does what it says to do. But it's always verified. You can always verify manually the code of the contract. Run your own verification on it. In terms of the value of the contract, and the value of the tokens, that depends on the market. If it trades on an exchange, which it may well do, then it will have a particular value in the exchange. But we don't force the token to have a particular value. The value of the token in the market is what it trades at.
Isn't the value also by the collateral of the contract that created it?
Yeah, it depends. It depends. But again, it's based on what the market is.
Market or collateral?
Yes, you could have an analytics thing that said, okay, this is the book value of a token. This is the absolute minimum you can get out of a token. And you can put that into analytics and you wouldn't have to refer to an exchange.
Just to go back to what I asked earlier, would a line that I just forgot that I put in my contract, sending all of the contracts Zen to the specific miner,
right,
would that be a valid transaction?
A line that sends
all the contracts Zen to the specific miner that happens to be mining that block.
Yeah. Yes. There's two things. Firstly, once you create a contract, the contract is fixed. Its code doesn't change, so you can't alter a contract after creating it. And then the second question is, can you put in a logic block in that contract, a backdoor in the contract? Of course you can, but then the analytics programs will pick up on that and they'll say, okay, this contract has a backdoor.
But how can I not change? Why can I not change it?
Why can't you change it? If you change the code of the contract, then you will change the hash of that code, and then that contract will just have a different reference. It will have a different identifier, and the tokens it creates will also have a different identifier. So we distinguish tokens by the contract that it creates, and contracts are distinguished by their hashes.
Is there a limit to how many tokens a contract can create?
Nope, not in practice. Well, in theory, you could say that a contract can't create more than like maximum integer value of number of tokens. But there's no particular. That's not a.
And also, there is no limit to the amount of contracts.
Correct.
So you could potentially create an infinite amount of tokens in contracts.
Right, infinite, a very large amount. What you would do is in the code of the contract itself. The code of the contract itself. So all tokens have to be created by a contract running.
Can contracts create contracts?
Yes, they can. There's not much reason for it, but they can theoretically do that. The limits, any limits on how many tokens a contract creates, are coded into the contract itself. It's a code of the contract. So the contract commits to, says it's part of its code that I will create up to 10 million tokens, and then stop, and then see, and then that function will cease to be operable, and that's what will happen. Again, if you attempt to obey that by a backdoor and so on, well, you can code that stuff, but it will be
No,
fairly obvious.
denial of service. So if I create a contract that creates a contract that creates a contract that creates a
Okay.
contract.
I see what you're getting at now. Okay, fine. That's it. Right.
What about resource bound?
Yes. Okay.
Well, it goes out of the resource bounds because you have a new contract. The contract is bound by the resource bound.
1 second.
Specifically.
So a contract. There's a couple of things, right? Firstly, a contract can run and create a transaction. That's one thing. And secondly, a contract gets created, it gets activated. Now, activating a contract, that is a particular act, it's a special action. That will to do that, a contract to do that.
Tokens, no? It can be paid for by Zen tokens, which
Yes,
are generated by a different
and
contract.
only by Zen contract. Only by Zen.
So essentially, I can create an infinite loop of.
There you go. Here's what. If to activate a contract, you have to make a particular bonus for miners in the future. In other words, anyone who mines any block while that contract is active, even if the contract doesn't do anything, receive a bonus. That bonus is Zen tokens. And Zen tokens cannot be created by contracts. So that is the hard limit that contracts can't be avoided. So a contract can create another contract just like a human being can. But there's a limited resources available to do so. Any contract only owns a limited amount of resources, just like any person only owns a limited amount of resources. And that is actually one half of the contract Zen system. It's creating these contracts. The other half is when the contracts run. When the contracts run, right? But at the point at which they've run, you've already proven what these resource bounds are. They're not fixed, by the way. They depend on the data inputs. You prove that for certain inputs, it takes a certain amount of resources, and we don't use that to require everyone pay a certain fee of a certain amount of Zen. What we do is just like in Bitcoin, you can run a limited number of script operations in a block. I think the limit is 40,000 or something like that. So we do the same thing. We have a consensus limit in Zen, and all that means is that it reduces the degree of what's called centralization pressure. We make the number of nodes that can run Zen as large as possible by guaranteeing to them in the consensus that they're not going to have to execute a lot of data. They're not going to execute a lot of computation. Okay, so that's where resource bounds come. Yes.
Talk about Zen team or status like for the future.
Same concept.
Zen team in the current status and plans for the future.
What?
Sorry. What is Zen team?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah. The Zen team. Yeah. Okay. So Zen team and plans for the future. Yes.
And current status.
Current status is we want to come up with test set soon. And then we will. After that, we'll talk about a set. Team is me, Nathan, and there's 4 other individuals that you're not yet familiar with, but I'm happy to introduce you to them. Yeah.
Can one contract you make transactions with the tokens of another contract?
Yes. Yes, this would be ideal for like an ETF or something like that. You want to hold this. Programs?
For actual code.
Yes.
No, for actual code. Because on the website there's
For actual what?
for actual code that you can write.
Oh, good.
Actual.
Oh, you mean what's our programming language? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
The only online.
So we're taking the route that we're not going to create a new programming language from the ground up. We're not going to create a new virtual machine from the ground up. What we're going to do is we're going to use an existing language that has the right properties, and then we're going to restrict it so that it's good for doing contracts. F star, exactly. So F star is a formally verified language, formally verifiable language. You can do things like prove resource bounds and so on. What we do is we take F star, we add on a library to provide 4 Zen functions, and then we add on restrictions into what contracts, what sorts of programs you can write. We say so every program, every contract we write in Zen is an F-star program that has to have particular properties. It has to generate a transaction, something with a transaction time, for instance, and it has to operate on certain inputs. And then on that program, we have these resource bounds, that's our programming language initially. We recognize that F-star is kind of a computer science language. It comes from the academic sphere, so it's not the easiest language for everyone to use. What we're going to do is we're going to add on utilities and so on to make it easy to create Zen contracts. We're going to try and make it as easy as possible to do code contracts. But our consensus is based on a formally verified core language, which is a core part of F-star.